Okay, so we're now going to look at 1.5, which is multiplying and dividing these signed numbers. So let's just review what we know so far. What we've learned so far for our rules is for multiplication. So a positive number times a positive number stays positive. A positive number times a negative number is negative. Negative times a positive number is negative, right? And negative times a negative, when we multiply, makes it a positive. Now, these same rules are going to also apply for division. So a positive over a positive is positive. Positive over negative is negative. Negative over positive is negative. And negative divided by a negative number is positive. So these are our rules for multiplication and division. So we're going to apply these new rules now to different problems. And we're going to work through them and we're going to watch our signs. The only thing that's not signed is 0. 0 doesn't have a sign. Everything else has a sign. Okay, so let's work with fractions first. And I'm on page 74. And we'll look at question 24. Over 15. Okay. So this is what we've got. Now we have parentheses. So when we have parentheses like this, this means we're multiplying. Now, do we have to have common denominators when we multiply fractions together? No. So when you got the parentheses, it's an easier problem. We don't have to get common denominators. Okay? What we can do is we can cancel out, right? Cross cancel. Let's go ahead first, though, and get rid of our signs. Let's figure out what our sign's going to be. Well, we have a negative and a negative. That's going to make that then a positive. So our sign's going to be positive. And let's go ahead and reduce it down. We've got a 5 and a 15. So that's going to be a 1 and a 3 when we reduce on our diagonal. And what about the 16 and the 6? Well, those have a 2 in common. So that's going to make it an 8 and a 3. Now we simply multiply across, because we're multiplying here. 1 times 8 is 8. 3 times 3 makes it a 9. So when we multiply, no common denominators are needed. We got rid of our double negatives here. There's a negative and a negative. Made it positive. You don't have to put the positive there. I just put it there so we can keep track of the signs. So much easier than adding or subtracting these. Let's try another one. How about 28? 28, we've got a minus 6 times a minus 2 thirds. Well, what are we going to do? We want to make sure everything's a fraction. So we're going to make this negative 6 and negative 6 over a 1. So you can always add that 1. So everything's a fraction now. No common denominators are needed. We can go ahead and figure out our sign. What's our sign going to be? We've got parentheses. So a negative times a negative makes it a positive number. And we can cancel out. We can cancel that 6 and reduce it down with that 3. So 6 and 3 have a 3 in common. So that's a 2, a 1 here. So 2 times 2 makes it then a 4. 1 times 1 is 1. And then my final answer, we don't need it over 1. My final answer is simply going to be 4. Positive 4. So is everyone okay with those? Does everyone kind of see what we're doing? So what do? When we multiply, we can cancel out those double negatives. Also, what can we do? Cancel on the diagonal. We do not need common denominators. So when we're adding and subtracting, much, much easier. Let's try another one. This one's got a lot of different things going on. How about question 70? Well, let's make sure we know the difference between these. Let's look at 49 and 51. Just to make sure we know the difference between 0 and undefined. Zero divided by any number is 0. So when 0 is on the top, 0 divided by -5, 0 divided by 100, 0 divided by any number is going to be what? 0. Now 51, though, is a little bit different. Because 51, the 0 is down below. And when that 0 is down below, that's going to make it undefined. So that 0 is below. So that's going to come out to be undefined. And here's how you tell the difference. And when you think about it, okay, if I have no pizzas and I try to feed 5 people, I can't feed anybody. Okay, so 0 divided by any number is still 0. So if I've got 5 people that want a pizza but no pizzas, nobody gets anything. What about this one, though? This one says I've got basically 11.5 pizzas. I have nobody to eat the pizzas, so I can't do that because there's nobody there to eat the pizzas, so it's undefined. Right? 0 is down below, so that's not possible. Why would you order a whole bunch of pizzas with nobody there to eat them? So that's why this is undefined. You can't take a number and divide it by 0. It doesn't happen. Can't work. So always make sure if your 0's in the top, it's 0. If 0's in the bottom, it's undefined. It's not 0. Not a real number. This is also not a real number. So that's going to not be a real number there. You can't do it. It's undefined. I just want to make sure we clarified that before we move on to anything else. Now we're going to put everything we've learned together with absolute values, with adding, subtracting, with multiplying. So this is going to be kind of everything put together. No fractions on these, though. So we don't have to worry about common denominators. We don't have to worry about the fractions at all. We're going to look now at question 74. So no more fractions. These are just going to be integers. Rational, and that's what we're going to be working with. So we've got, on question 74, we've got the absolute value of 5 minus 3 times 9 minus 7 times a minus 4. So this is what we've got. So what I'm going to look at first is what's inside my absolute value, because that's my first step. Okay, absolute values are first. So order of operations, what do we got? Absolute value, square bracket, parentheses, first. Then we move on to exponents and square roots, which we don't have. Finally, then multiplication and addition, subtraction at the very end. So we're going to follow our order of operations. And we're going to go ahead now and work inside the absolute value. So let's write up on the right-hand side what's inside of our absolute value. So that's what we've got. And we're going to go ahead and work with it. Multiplications first. So minus 3 times 9, that makes it a minus 27. Now we're not multiplying anymore, right? So I went ahead and already did that. So now I've got $5 in my account. I'm going to take out 27. So that means 27's the negative number. It's larger. So my number is going to be negative. And 27 minus 5 makes it a what? Yep, negative 22. So that's there. So that's what we've got here. Okay, let's go ahead now. And we can do a couple of things at once. Let's go ahead and take the absolute value of our negative 22. And the absolute value of our negative 22 makes it positive. So that's going to come down here. And what do we have here? Let's look at the blue part here. What is this? This is multiplication, correct? So we're going to go ahead and multiply. And when we have a negative times a negative, it makes it a positive. And 7 times 4 makes it a 28, doesn't it? So is everyone all right with that so far? So what did we do first? We took what was inside of our absolute values, our absolute value bars. We worked it out. We were careful with our order of operations. We got our answer. We brought it back down. Then we said, okay, we'll do our absolute value. Then we'll multiply. Now we're left with only addition and subtraction. We only have addition, so these are going to be added together. We've got 22 and 28. That should add together, and that should give you a 50, doesn't it? So that's going to come out to be our final answer, which is a 50 for question 74. And that's just following your order of operations. Quite a bit easier since there's no fractions with these. So that was 74. Let's look now at a couple of these. Let's look now at 79. You don't have to have common denominators with this one. All we have to do is combine them together. So question 79, we have a minus 10 times 2 plus 6 times 2 over minus 3 minus a minus 1. Let's take a moment to make sure we copied it down correctly. Looks like we did it correctly. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to simplify this down. And the way I approach it is I'm going to look at the numerator of the top half, clean it up, do the denominator of the bottom half, clean it up, and then put everything back together. So let's look at our numerator, the top half. And what do we have in our numerator? We have a minus 10 times 2 plus 6 times 2 minus 10 times 2. Positive and a negative makes it a negative 20. 6 times 2 makes it 12. And minus 20 plus 12. What's my sign going to be? Positive or negative? Negative. Why? Because 20 is the bigger number, and it's negative. So we've got a negative, and we've got 20 minus 12. Well, 20 minus 12 is an 8. So now we've got a negative 8 in our numerator. Repeat the process with the denominator. So in our denominator, we have a minus 3 minus a minus 1. Remember, we have parentheses. When we have parentheses, that's multiplication here. So we've got the parentheses, back-to-back signs. Negative and a negative makes it then a positive. And minus 3 plus 1. Is it a positive 2 or is it a negative 2? Negative 2. Why? Because 3 is negative, and so the sign of the larger one comes along. Now we're almost done, because now when we rewrite it, we've got a negative 8 divided by a negative 2. Well, negative and negative is positive, right? Just like negative times negative is positive, negative divided by a negative is also positive. And this would then come out to be a positive 4. Just take your time with these positive and negative numbers. Students make mistakes a lot with these because you'll make a mistake with the sign because you'll think you're multiplying when you're not. You're adding and subtracting. That was 79. Let's look at 88. So we're now going to look at question 88. Oh, wait, I wrote it wrong. You got it right here. Sorry about that. Write it so it looks right here. 3 times negative 2 minus 4 over minus 3 minus a minus 1 again. Okay. Yeah, so this is the same as the last one. Just more stuff to do. There's your square brackets. Now, why do we have square brackets? Because we've already used parentheses, right? You don't want to have multiple sets of parentheses. It's confusing. So in this case, you've got parentheses inside, so you use square brackets outside. So now let's look at our numerator. You always want to break these up into smaller pieces. Make sure I copied it down right. There should be a plus there. Okay. 3 times 2, negative 2 there, minus 4. So let's take our time and work this out. So what are we going to do first? Well, first is inside. And 3 times a negative 2 is a negative 6. We're going to bring down that negative 4. Keep the positive there. And now we've got negative 6 minus 4. We're not multiplying, so it stays negative. Minus 6 minus 4 makes it a minus 10. Okay. What do we know here? We can go ahead and do our multiplication. When we cancel signs, that's multiplication. So when we go through and cancel out these signs, that's multiplication. So we've got negative 5 times 2 is a negative 10. Positive times negative stays negative, 10 there. And putting those together, we now have a negative 20. Everyone all right with that so far? We just kind of went through all the steps. We worked it out. And now, what about the denominator? Well, we did that earlier. We can do it again. But in our denominator, we have a minus 3 minus a minus 1. So that makes it a positive 1. Minus 3 plus 1 makes it a minus 2. Same thing as what we did on the last one, right? And what do we know about a negative divided by another negative number? Well, negative over negative is like positive times positive, or sorry, negative times negative, so that makes it a positive. And 20 divided by 2 makes it a positive 10. So not too bad on these. The ones where you'll struggle at is the fractions. Now we're going to plug values in. So on the next ones, we're going to be plugging in values into expressions that they give you. So we're going to go ahead and look at, how about question 96 on the next page? So question 96, we're only going to do, I guess there's not two parts of it. So we're going to look at 96 here. We're going to have to plug in our values. And there's only one set of numbers, so we're just going to work with it. So we're looking at question 96. We've got 5/6 x plus 3/2 y times a minus 1/3 a. And you're given the following values. So you're going to be given values. You're given x is 6, y is -4, and a is 3. And it's not going to be as difficult as a lot of the others because most of these fractions are just going to clear themselves out. Okay, so it's not going to be difficult once we work with the fractions because we shouldn't have to really worry about common denominators so much because these should go away. So let's plug our values in, and we'll just do each one individually over to the side here. Okay, so I'm just going to work on this one in green, and we'll do it first. So what do we have? We have 5/6 x. So I'm going to plug in that 6. So that's going to be 5/6 times 6. And I'm going to make that 6 a 6 over 1. And whenever we plug in a value, we want to use parentheses. So I replace that x with the 6 there. Now, again, very nice and easy on this one because what are we doing? Multiplying. So what can we do with the 6's on the diagonal? We're multiplying, right? So these 6's can cancel. And what's left over? 5. So that comes out to be 5. So there's that piece. We'll bring down our positive here. Let's do the next one. 3/2 y. So we're going to plug in a -4. And we're going to make that a -4 over 1. So when we plug it in, we use parentheses. And when it's a whole number, if we've got fractions, we put it over 1. My answer in this case is going to be what? -1, right? Because this is negative here. And what can we do? We can cancel the 4 and the 2. And so that's going to make that then a 2. And that's going to make this then a 1. And 3 times 2, we already determined our sign is going to be a negative. So that's going to be a -6. And I'll just use square brackets because of all the parentheses here. And you could have went ahead and just brought that down as a -6. I just brought the positive down with it. Not a big deal. You could have just went right straight to a -6. I just brought the positive down. So it doesn't matter either way. And what about our last one? -1/3 a. What is -1/3 a going to be? Well, that's going to be -1/3. That's 3 over 1, right? And that's going to leave that then with a negative. These cancel. And that's going to be a -1. So those 3's cancel. And it leaves you then with a -1. So give everyone a moment to kind of digest this. So what did we do? It looked complicated because these fractions. We thought, oh, this is going to be a really difficult problem. It really wasn't because our fractions disappeared, right? So now we're done with all the fractions. So I did each one on the side by itself, plugged in the numbers. Whenever we work with these, if you have a whole number and you've got fractions to work with also, we make it over 1. That way we can cancel and work with it a little bit easier. So now we're back to this step. And what do we have? We have a positive and a negative here. So that's going to keep that negative. You can use square brackets or you can use parentheses, either one. And 5 minus 6, well, 5 minus 6 is a -1. Square brackets are the same as parentheses. And so what do we have left now? We have a -1 times a -1. And a negative times a negative makes it then a what? +1. So your final finished answer is going to be a 1. So I know that one was a little bit of time to go through, but it really wasn't that difficult. It was just a matter of watching the signs. Question 99. We'll look at that one. 99 involves powers. So for question 99, we have a minus 2y squared plus 3a squared. And what happens with this one is students make a mistake with the sign. So we need a's and y's. So I'm not even going to write down the x. I'm just going to use the y and the a. So we're going to be given the following. We're going to be given y is a negative 4, and a is a 3. Whenever we insert numbers in for a variable, we have to put parentheses around it. So very, very important, whenever you plug a value in for a variable, put parentheses around it. So what we have is we have a minus 2 times a minus 4 squared plus 3 times 3 squared. So I plug my values in. When we work these out, we've got to be super careful about our signs. And also the order of operations. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do these powers. And then we're going to multiply, and then we're going to add everything together. So we've got first a negative 4 squared with parentheses, just like this. Now, when we have a negative 4 squared with parentheses around it, when we square something, that's just saying it's multiplying it by itself. So a negative 4 squared with the parentheses around it would be negative 4 times negative 4. And then we know that negative and negative is going to make that now a what? Positive 16. So be very careful with that. What happens is students will make the mistake here of they're saying, well, we can clear out these negatives here. And I can't do that because that's multiplication. And powers have to be done first. So always do your exponent first, then work with what you've got left over. What about the next one? 3 squared. That's 3 times 3, which is then what? 9. So that one's a positive 9 there. Now what can we do? Well, now we can multiply. So now we have a negative 2 times a positive 16. So that gives us then a negative 32. We have a 9 times 3. 9 times 3 is a 27. And what do we have now? Is our answer going to be a positive or a negative number? Negative. And what's it going to be? It should be a negative 5, isn't it? Because we've got our 32 minus our 27. Yep, and that comes out to be a negative 5. So what's your final answer? Negative 5. So we have to be very careful when we square a negative, we write it out, and then negative times a negative, see, makes that a positive 16. So be very, very careful with the signs. Let's look at one more. 104. And this one is going to make us remember the difference between 0 and undefined. So 104. We've got xy plus 8a over x minus 6. And we're going to use the following again. We're going to be given x equals 6, y equals negative 4, and a is 3. Now let's remember, if 0's in the top of this fraction, 0 divided by any number is 0, right? So if 0's on the top, it's 0. If 0's down below, it's not 0, it is undefined. So if we have a 0 below, it's undefined. If you have a 0 in the top, it's 0. So let's work it out and see what we've got. Plug in your values. We've got 6 times a negative 4 plus 8 times 3. Down below, we've got 6 minus 6 here. And then we're going to work this out. We're going to see what we have. Make sure we plugged everything in correctly. So let's see what we've got. And we've got 6 times a negative 4 plus 8 times 3. 6 times a negative 4, that's going to be a minus 24. 8 times 3 is also 24. And 1 is positive, 1 is negative. So they're going to subtract. And that gives you a difference of what? 0, doesn't it? So we've got 0 on the top here. What about down below? Down below, we've got 6 minus 6, which again makes it what? Make sure I copied it correctly. Yep, 6 minus 6 makes it a 0. Now, what happens when you have 0 over 0? Well, 0 over 0 is not 0 because 0 is down below. That's the one that controls everything. 0 divided by 0 is not 0. It is undefined. So anytime there's a 0 in the denominator, it stays undefined. If there's a 0 in the numerator only, then it's 0. But if the 0 is down below, it's undefined. And the reason for that is that 0 below. So even when you have a 0 over 0, it's still undefined, not 0. Now we're going to look at some applications where we're going to have to write up our expressions and work through them. And some of these are a little bit trickier to set up. These we're going to have to be very careful with the order and very careful about what goes where and the signs and the placement. So we'll do 3 or 4 of these, and this is probably going to be the end of this section. So a little bit more. We'll get done maybe a few minutes early. But we are going to spend quite a bit of time on these just to make sure we know how they work. Question 106. Question 106, read the directions, write a numerical expression for each phrase, and then simplify the expression. So we're not going to have any equal signs because this is going to be an expression. So don't worry about equals, they're not going to be there. We have to make sure we put the parentheses in the correct place and make sure everything's in the correct order. The product of, that means multiply, 4 and a negative 7 is added to a negative 12. So product means multiply. So we have 4 times a negative 7. And we're going to go ahead and add to that a negative 12. We could do the positive negative and then simplify it. But when you add a negative number, it's just negative. So we're going to keep that as simple as possible. And that's just going to be a negative 12. You could do the positive negative and then clean it up. But I hope we understand when we add a negative, it's just negative. Now what do? Well, now we just clean it up. We have 4 times a negative 7. Positive times negative makes it a negative 28. And then we got to add to that a negative 12. They're both negative. Parentheses are gone. Negative and another negative makes it negative. And we've got 28 and 12. That makes it a negative then 40 for our final answer. Final answer there would be a negative 40. Will be the next one we're going to look at. I want to do a variety of these, so we'll probably do at least 4, maybe 5 of them, just so we get a good conglomerate of all of them. The product of -3 and the difference of 3 and a -7. So what are we looking at? Product. Now the and is where it separates them. Okay, the and is going to separate the two products. So our first one is a -3. So we've got a -3. And we're then going to take that -3, we're going to have to use parentheses here, and we're going to multiply that -3 by the difference of, that means subtract, the difference of 3 and a -7. So 3 and a minus, and we may have to use square brackets, or you can use double parentheses, it doesn't matter. I think on this one we can just keep the parentheses. You can use square brackets if you want, or you can use the double parentheses either way. In this case, I'd probably just keep it with the parentheses. Why do we have the double negative? Because you've got the difference. Difference means subtract. So we're taking the difference of 3, which is here, and a -7. So difference means subtract. So this one comes from the difference, and the other one comes from the fact that it's a -7. What do we know? We know the double negative is going to make this then a what? Positive. So let's rewrite this now as -3 times 3 plus 7. 3 plus 7 makes it now 10. And -3 times 10 makes it a what? -30. You just have to be very, very careful on the setup and watch for things like double negatives because they're all there. You just got to be careful when you plug the values in and watch the order, especially with subtraction and division. Order is important. So that was 112. How about 116? This one's got division. Okay, so move this up so we can see we're looking at 116 here. And we've got the sum of -18 and -6 divided by the product of 2 and -4. So the sum of these two numbers. So on the top, what would we have? The top would be a -18, -6. Because you've got a -18, you're going to add to that a -6. So there's that piece. It's the top half. Is everyone okay with that? And you could do the positive, negative, and cancel your signs out. But I think it's easier just when we have a sum to just keep the signs. Then we're going to divide that by product. And what does product mean? Multiply, right? So the denominator, number down below, is going to be multiplication. And what do we have in our denominator? Product of 2 and a -4. So we've got our numerator, which is just adding them together. So -6 and a -18. Down below, we're going to divide that by, product means multiply, 2 times -8. -4. Now we're going to combine these together. We'll put the top half first. We've got a -18 and a -6, both negative. We keep that negative since we're combining like terms here, adding and subtracting. And we've got 18 and 6. Add those together. That makes it a -24. No multiplication. If there's multiplication, we would make it positive, right? But we don't. We're just subtracting them. What about down below? We've got multiplication down below. 2 times a -4. Well, that stays at negative, and that's going to be a -8. Now we can finish it because a negative divided by a negative makes it a positive. 24 divided by 8 makes it a 3. So my answer on this one would be a positive 3. Let's talk about percentages. Question 120. And I think we'll just do this one and another one, and that'll be it. And then we'll talk quickly about the homework. So question 120. %30 of the product of -8 and 5. Now, first thing we need to talk about is this percentage. Whenever we have a percentage, we need to convert that percentage to a decimal. So 30%. Well, 30% as a decimal would be 0.3. We move it over one place. So 30% as a decimal would be 0.3. What are we doing with these? It says 30% of, okay, so that's product, of -8 and 5. So everything is getting multiplied together. So that percentage gets multiplied. Percentages are always multiplied. So we've got our 30%, which is 0.3. We're going to then multiply that by -8 and a positive 5. Because everything's getting multiplied here. Okay. And what do we now do? Well, we multiply across. What's my sign going to be? How many negatives do I have? One negative. Since we only have one negative, we keep it negative. And then we just use our calculator. We don't have to worry about signs because we know what our sign's going to be. So we don't even have type signs in at all. So we have 0.3. Going to multiply that by 8. We're going to multiply that by 5. And we know it should be negative because there's a single negative. So we don't even have to put negatives in our calculator. We multiply them out, and that comes out to now be 12. So my final answer here would be -12. And one more. Let's look at 124. And this should get us to be able to finish up 1-5 in the homework. So 124. We're talking about products and also division in these fractions. So the product of -2/3 -1/5 divided by 1/7. So let's write what we've got. Product. Product means multiply. So we've got the product of 2/3 and a -1/5. So that's going on top. And then we're going to divide that by 1/7. So it's going to go down below. This is going to make us kind of remember and talk about how to handle a fraction over another fraction. It's not difficult at all because it's just not adding, so we're not going to need common denominators. This is strictly multiplication, so no common denominators are going to be needed. But I am going to kind of break things up on the side together. So we've got a -2/3 times a -1/5. Well, nothing's going to cancel because that 2 and 5 can't cancel, and that 1 and 3, they can't cancel either. We have a double negative, so we know our answer is going to be positive. We can now just multiply across. So -2 times -1 makes it a +2, and 3 times 5 makes it a 15. And that's now going to come out to be 2/15, 1 over 7. Now we need to talk about a fraction divided by another fraction. We can't really divide a fraction by another fraction, but what we do is we multiply by the reciprocal. So we've got a fraction on the top and a fraction down below. And so what we do is we take our first fraction and we keep it the same. So that's going to be 2 over 15. The denominator, though, we invert. So we're going to flip over that 1/7. Because when you divide a fraction by another fraction, what you do is you invert and multiply. So when I flip that fraction over down below, invert it, that's going to be 1 over 7, or sorry, 7 over 1. Because it was 1/7, 1 over 7. So when I flip it over, then I get 7 over 1. Multiplying, so no common denominators, nothing cancels. So now all we do is multiply across. 2 times 7, that's a 14. 15 times 1, that's a 15. So that's going to be my final answer for that question there. 14 over 15. And only once in a while do you ever have to divide by a fraction. Let's take a moment now to go over our homework real quick to see if there's any that we need to look at, just to make sure we've covered it all. And I think we've covered everything that we need to talk about. Okay, and the first one, this is just thinking about what we've got. Okay, and if it's a real number or not, and if it's true or false, you can work out that one on your own. Think about it. It's pretty easy. Question 5 and 10, and I think there's a few others. Let's just work out 5. And this is on 1-4. We're going to work out question 5, just so you know how to do it, so you can work through question 10. So question 5. In order to add -9, +7, you should first begin by finding the blank of the blank. Okay, now, in this one, I want you to go back to the textbook, and it talks about the absolute value. Okay, now, first off, and it's in your textbook, you can there's only 2 of them that talk about this, but what they want you to do, let me actually find it here, because it's back in 1-4, talk about using the absolute value. I don't so much, but they do a little bit. And where is it? Let me find the page that references it. It talks about the different signs and how they work. It's kind of on page 55. We're going to talk about this, though. What we want to first do is we're going to find the absolute value. Or sorry, let's make sure we've got it. We want to add these together. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're first going to find the difference, right? So we're going to find the difference. Well, let me write it right so it comes out to be this. The correct wording here, make sure we say it right. We want to find the absolute value of the difference. So the absolute value is going to go first. And what are we finding the absolute value of? The difference. Just so it matches up with what we want. Just so we got the wording right. So it'll be the absolute value, because they're different signs, of the difference. There's a couple more of these. Question 10, though. Very, very similar. So we first do the absolute value. Now, what are we going to work with on question 10? Now, on question 5, We found the difference, right? Because they were different signs, so we had to find the difference. But what about question 10? We're going to have to find the absolute value of the what? Sum, right? Why are we going to add these together? Because minus 8 minus 4, they go together and make it minus 12. So this one's going to be a sum. Because they're the same signs, so they sum together. Question 5, they were different signs, so we use the difference. And I think there's another one in your homework as well. Maybe it's just those two, but you see how they're done now. So the absolute value of either the sum or the difference. We do it, and we don't even think about doing it. But when we add or subtract them, we actually take the absolute values. I think the rest of these we should be comfortable with on that page. I'll do 14, you can do 15. So we need to see if this is going to be true or false. If A, B, and C are real numbers, is this statement going to be true or is this statement going to be false? Well, let's pick numbers and see if it works or not. So how about we pick some numbers here? How about we pick A is 5 and B is 3? And let's see if we get the same result. See if the sides match up. So for question 14, I'll just add on another page here. So for question 14, I'm going to work it out here. And this, by the way, is 1.4 in your homework. We're going to plug in our values, and we're going to see if they match up. And if they match up, it's true. If they're different, it's false. This is homework question 14. We have minus parentheses A plus B equals minus A minus B. Now this should be true. Next week, we'll talk about the different properties. But right now, we can show that because we're going to use, just to show you that they are the same, we're going to use A is 5 and B is 3. So when I plug in my A is 5 and my B is 3, this becomes 5 plus 3 inside my parentheses. Okay. What about the other side? Well, that A is 5, so that A comes down as that 5. And what about the negative? That comes down. Same thing with the B. B is 3. Negative just comes down. Now, these are going to be the same because on the left-hand side, 5 plus 3 is 8. And that negative is just going to come down with it. And what about on the right-hand side? Well, on the right-hand side, minus 5 minus 3 is also what? Minus 8. These are the same, so this would then be what? True. You're going to do the same process for question 15. You just have to think about 0 and how that works, and it may or may not be true. But plug in a value for A and see if it comes out to be the same. If it's the same, it's true. If it's not, then it's false. Now, the next ones we've worked through examples of. 17 is not that difficult. You may get kind of confused on 19. So try 19, but be very, very careful with the signs of these numbers. Whether they're positive, negative, and whether you're adding or subtracting. 20 is a little bit easier than 19, but you want to try these two, and if we need to, we can go over them next class period. 20 is not that difficult, just set up with the correct signs. 19, though, may take a little bit of thinking. And 19, you might want to draw a picture so you can see how this diver moves up and down in the water. We also covered 1-5. Okay, and we'll just go through a couple of these. All kind of help you get set up with question 2. So for question 2, we want to look at our answer here. And it says, if x and y are both replaced by negative numbers, is the value going to be positive or is the value going to be negative? What I want you to do is I want you to check with these two sets of numbers. So let's check these two. I want you to check the signs on these two sets. So let's check when x is negative 3 and y is negative 9. And then I also want you to check when x is negative 10 and y is negative 1. So I want you to check both those sets of numbers, and I want you to see what you get out for your result. And see if they come out to be positive or negative. So you'll check this set and see if it's positive or negative up here. You'll check this set to see if they're positive or negative. And question 3, you need to think about what I'm looking at with values, whether they're positive, negative, or think a little bit about that. Okay, 3 is a little bit different. Question 4, what does an average mean? How do we find the average? Well, the average is going to be defined as the sum of the numbers divided by how many numbers you have. And I'm going to go ahead and list these numbers out. So it says on question 4, what is the average of all the even integers between minus 10 and positive 12 inclusive? So it's going to include those. So we're looking for even numbers. So we have minus 10, minus 8, minus 6, minus 4, minus 2. We've got 0. And we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. So 0 is going to be that even integer in there. So we're going to include all these numbers. So we're starting at negative 10. We want even numbers. And they're even integers. So we started at negative 10, we went all the way up to positive 12. We want to find the average. So how do we find the average? We're going to add up all these numbers and divide by how many are in the list. So we divide by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you divide by 12. So you divide by that 12 at the end. So add them up, divide by your 12. Same thing with number 6. Add them up and divide. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Divide by 8 in that case. Question 7. We've got division. So just to give you a hint for question 7. Question 7, you can rewrite question 7 as multiplication. Because division, what you do is flip it over to make it multiplication. So just to make sure we know how to do 7, because it's division, you flip your second fraction over. Question 8 we've talked about. 9 we've talked about. 10 we've talked about. And 11, you can look this up in your textbook. Maybe there's only one number that doesn't have a reciprocal. Or you may already know what that is. There's only one number you can't flip over. Question 12, we've already done. Something like it. By the way, question 12. I'll go ahead and give you this one. Do you think question 12, is it going to be 0 or is it going to be undefined? Which one? 0, right? Why 0? Because 0's on the top. Just to make sure we don't get confused on that. Okay. 13, we just plug the numbers in. 14, we've talked about. 15, we've talked about. Talked about all of these. 18 is going to be like question 4. Except instead of the even numbers, you want them all. So that would be all the numbers added up. So that would be minus 15, minus 14, minus 13, minus 12, all the way out to 7, 8, and 9. So you'd have to add up all those numbers and divide. We talked about 19, and I know we went over one very, very similar to question 20 as well. So let's remember what our homework's going to be for next week. We now went through 2 sections, which we either go through 2 or 3 sections every class period. So your homework for next week is going to be 1.4, should be able to do them all, and 1.5, should be able to do them all. So that's going to be our homework for next week. And next week we'll be finishing up chapter 1 as well. You should be able to do 1.6 and 1.7 next week. And then we'll review that following week and then have our exam after that. That's going to be your homework, and I'll see everyone then next week. Don't forget, I always post the notes and the lectures online so you can keep up if you're gone or if you just want to review it again. So look in your Canvas course and you'll see the video links and the notes as well.